Welcome to our latest in our monthly series of EdSource Roundtables. My name is Ann Vasquez, Executive Director of EdSource. California is home to the largest higher education system and certainly the most diverse in the nation, made up of 3 public systems as well as hundreds of private colleges and universities. These post-secondary institutions serve millions of students. For many, their path to a 4-year degree begins at California's community colleges. But when it comes time to transfer, too few are successfully making the jump to the state's public universities. A campaign for college opportunity report last year found that only 4 in 10 community college students in California transferred within 6 years. Today, we'll discuss the challenges facing transfer students as they attempt to enroll at the University of California and California State University systems. What more can be done to help these students? And lastly, EdSource would not be able to bring us all together today for this very important discussion were it not for the support of our funders. I'd like to thank the Lumina Foundation for making today's roundtable discussion possible. Now for the introductions. Please welcome Han-Min Yun Wu, Executive Director of Undergraduate Admissions at the UC Office of the President. Also from UC and with us today is Dale Lehman, Executive Director of the Office of Undergraduate Admissions at UC Irvine. Please also welcome Marty Alvarado, Executive Vice Chancellor of Educational Services at California Community Colleges. Next, I'm happy to introduce April Gromo, Assistant Vice Chancellor for Enrollment Management Services at California State University. Please also welcome Audrey Dow, Senior Vice President of the Campaign for College Opportunity, a California policy and research organization. And joining our discussion today is Marjorie Blen, a student at San Francisco State University who is studying sociology. Please also welcome our co-moderators today, EdSource Higher Education reporters Ashley Smith and Michael Burke. Welcome everyone. Ashley, I'll pass it over to you to get started.
Thanks, Anne. I'd like to kick off this discussion with a question for Audrey. The campaign released a very thorough and detailed report last year about the challenges California's community college students face when transferring to a CSU or UC. Audrey, do you mind summarizing some of the challenges and barriers that the campaign found?
Absolutely. Thank you, Ashley, and thanks to EdSource for allowing me to be here today. In July of last year, we released a report titled Chutes and Ladders. And that was, the title was really important to us because for so many students attempting to transfer at our California community colleges, that's what it feels like to them, that, transfer is about sometimes rolling the dice and either climbing up, but unbeknownst to them, a roll of the dice could lead to a chute, causing them to fall way behind. As Anne shared in her introduction, Ashley, we saw the numbers by race and ethnicity and the percentages of students that are not completing transfer or being able to transfer after what we tell them, which is 2 years. It's quite concerning that, the community colleges in California serve the largest amount of students in the state with over 2 million students. When you think about where Latinos and where Black students go in California, the vast majority of them, nearly 70%, will start their education at a California community college. So for Latinos and Black students in particular, their pathway to the baccalaureate degree is transfer and is the California community college system. But only 9% of Black students we found in the report and 10% of Latinx students will transfer in 4 years. That's 2 more years than we tell our students. Don't we all say, hey, students in high school, if you're going to the community colleges, you can go there, save some money, do your first 2 years at the community college and then transfer to CSU or UC as if it's some very easy, magical, perfectly laid out process. And it simply is not that. Again, only 9% of our Black students, 10% of Latinx students transferring in 4 years. Of the 500,000 first-time freshmen who enrolled in 2019-20 at the California Community College system, we're predicting if past trends hold, only about 2.5% of them will transfer in 2 years and less than a quarter in 4 years. That's not only detrimental to those students, but it's really detrimental to the state's ability to meet its demand for more baccalaureate degrees in the workforce. We know that the bachelor's degree is the entry credential, for work these days. And if individuals cannot access that degree, California is not going to have the workforce it needs that will sustain our knowledge-based economy. Just point blank, there's no getting around that. That's why we're super excited about, the governor in his budget articulating a goal for college attainment of 70%, because that helps us all of our systems of higher education work towards a North Star and really be able to kind of lay out year over year what our progress needs to be on transferring and in conferring degrees. I think some of the really good news we found, Ashley, in the report was really around the associate degree for transfer. The associate degree for transfer was an attempt to clear up this transfer maze that has existed for so many years, with a set number of courses students take at the community college, a guaranteed path and guaranteed admission to the CSU system, and then a guarantee on the back end at the CSU of a set number of courses, a unit cap, and graduation to the baccalaureate degree. So 60 units at the bottom, 60 units on the top, super clear pathway to the end. What we see is that about half of the ADTs, the associate degrees for transfer that the community colleges, half of all of the associate degrees that the community colleges are conferring are ADTs, meaning when we look at the data, students who are earning these degrees graduate with less units, graduate in less time. When they get to the CSU, they're taking less units. And guess what? They're graduating at higher rates than students who don't have the ADT. The problem is that half of the students who are transferring don't have the ADT. The problem is that the ADT is not aligned perfectly with a guarantee to the University of California. So students have to choose, do I apply to a CSU or UC, which is really putting our students at a disadvantage, and I think in some ways discriminating against our community college students when you think about the fact that freshmen, students in high school, can take the A to G curriculum and have an equal shot at both institutions. There's work that's being done right now to strengthen the associate degree for transfer. There's work being done with the CSU and UC to align the general education pathway to bring them much more closely together. But this is the work that has to continue and continue with urgency, because you see Marjorie here on this call. She is one student who will speak today for thousands and thousands of students who are encountering these chutes and ladders that just is really unfair for them. They're doing everything we ask of them. They're showing up, they're working hard, they're trying to meet with counselors, they are trying to get their degree, they're spending their resources, their money, their time. And because we allow a broken system to persist, we're failing them. And that's on us as an institution, that's on us as a state. And so we've got to come up with the solutions. This is not about more tutoring for our students. This is not about more grit from our students. Our students are showing grit. And really, for those that make it to the graduation line from a CSU or UC, they've gone through a Herculean task, and we should all be giving them a standing ovation.
No, I just wanted to bring you, Marjorie, into this conversation. As Audrey mentioned, you did successfully transfer a few years ago from City College of San Francisco to SF State. But years before that, you were also a community college student at Contra Costa College in the Bay Area, and ended up leaving that college before getting to transfer. I'm curious, what kind of troubles or challenges did you face in your first experience at Contra Costa College? And then what ultimately worked better when you arrived at City College years later?
So one of the many challenges that I faced was I wasn't seen. I was one of those students who was a first generation Latina in college. I was not because of my AB 540 status, I did not qualify for many programs at that time. We're talking about 2005. And I wasn't heard, I wasn't seen, no one helped me. I was an 18-year-old, no one retained me, no one took me under their wing, no program, no teacher, nothing. And then I got stuck in remedial education, that's another barrier, right? And then I decided that the system wasn't for me, that the higher education wasn't for people like me. And then I went into the workforce, right? And the workforce was like completely different, right? They're trying to, you get skills and then they try to pay you per skills that you gain. But I got stuck like many students that don't have a college degree, getting paid underpay and doing the work that I was capable to. When I went to City College of San Francisco, I also wasn't planning on transferring to San Francisco State. I was just trying to get a certificate as an adult, as a parent, and trying to help my family. When I found out that remedial education wasn't going to be a thing, I still didn't consider transferring. I just considered my AA. And it wasn't because a counselor took me on her wing and smacked the student making a change, decided to give me wraparound resources. And this is the most important thing they did for me in my life. When transferring came, I didn't have to, I went to the transfer at my community college, but they were so packed, understaffed. I felt like it was just another duty, another responsibility, another barrier. I didn't understand. I didn't even know what assist was. I didn't understand the difference between CSU and UC. I didn't understand why I needed 60 unit, but they were so different from one another, and why foreign language. So what SMAC did was they did in one-on-one, and I know this is a privilege, by the way, but they did a one-on-one transferring workshop with me. And they explained to me personal insight question. They explained to me what credits meant. They explained to me what CSU, and versus UC, the financial differences in packages, what do I qualify as the AB 540 student. And I must say, I was accepted to 3 CSU, San Francisco State, San Jose State, and Sacramento State. I was accepted to 2 UCs, UC Santa Cruz and UC Merced, thanks to them taking the time to do that. And because of that, we do every year a transfer workshop, but that's the barrier that we set in community college, is the lack of information, the lack of transparency. Students should, if they say they want to transfer, they should automatically go into a transfer class, which is designed to help them personally meet them where they're at in their goals that they want to set for themselves the last semester they're at a community college. But unfortunately, that's not happening. And we keep acting like transfer is just certain students want to transfer. And in reality, is students don't know that they're capable of transferring. They don't know that they could do more than just a job certificate or an AA. They don't know that knowledge. They don't understand it. And the bureaucracy that make us feel less, it make us feel little, especially for students like myself that don't have the support of other in their families, in their communities to help them, right? If I wasn't privileged enough to be taken in by these folks, I probably don't know where I would be right now.
Thanks, Marjorie. Marty, I just want to give you a chance to talk about some of the challenges you all are seeing within the system, as coming from the Chancellor's office. As Audrey mentioned, that the campaign found only 4 in 10 community college students transfer within 6 years. And we do know that ADT, the Associate Degree for Transfer, is attempting to streamline that process. But what are you all seeing across the 116 community colleges?
Yeah, thank you so much for the opportunity to join this conversation. And I feel, I'm not sure what the right word is, moved, privileged, responsible as I follow Marjorie's comments, because I think for our system, the focus is squarely on the students and their experience. And so what we are finding, I'll speak for myself in this, what I think is most frustrating about what we encounter when we look at the transfer pathways and the transfer landscape is really that we still approach transfer from the right to fail era of higher education when we need to be moving into the student success era of higher education. And what I really mean by this, what we mean by this within the community colleges is really being explicit about who's bearing the burden when it comes to transfer. And so everything that Marjorie was noting, the students bear the burden for navigating the maze that we have created and the structures that we have within and across all of our systems. And that is that right to fail era mentality of students need to prove that they are worthy of being there and of transferring. And we set up the structures to really weed people out. Right. And I think we have to start naming that explicitly, that the inherent structures of our systems are designed to keep students out and to make it difficult to transfer. And that shifts the burden to the students. And what we need to be doing is moving that burden back to our institutions. I think the ADT is a valuable tool in doing that. I think it has unrealized potential and is limited in its ultimate potential, given that we have to substantially change our structures because it's a tool for the broken structures, right? As opposed to really dismantling the current structures. I think the other thing that we have to really name as we think about transfer and moving from this right to fail era into the student success area is also looking at our curricular pathways, right? They're rigid and they do not necessarily have the data informed outcomes that we need to be tracking in order to understand what should really be required for students. We've talked about both in the report that Audrey noted and from students, you have to find the right courses at the right time, right? To really try to figure out which school do I want to go to, what pathway do I want to go to. Again, the ADT is incredibly helpful as we try to streamline these efforts, but ultimately, as we have to start thinking about what happens to students as a result of obtaining, whether it's a certificate, degree, AA degree, bachelor's degree, and do the pathways that, the curricular pathways that we are setting up, does that actually help them in the long run? And is that really the required pathway? And so we create all of these structures built on this narrative that we believe this is what students need. And what we find when we look at the data is that sometimes often our assumptions are incorrect and we don't have the data, we're not using the data to inform our curricular pathways. I think the last thing I would just say when we look at transfer and some of the outcomes that we are unsatisfied with as a system is really that when we see constraints, we assume that they are a given, rather than really challenging them and thinking about how do we begin to look at these differently, look at things differently, again, from that student success perspective, our responsibility to students to remove and eliminate those burdens. It shouldn't, transfer success should not be contingent upon finding the right resource, the right counselor, the right sort of resource to help us navigate the maze. It should be removing the maze completely and the obstacles completely so that more students can move through this path seamlessly. I think what I'll end with is that it's really, I think it's really common in higher education historically for all of us to sort of point the finger around where the challenges exist, whether that's we don't have enough resources to accept all students, we don't have enough resources for counselors, we're not teaching the right things, or we don't have the money for X, Y, and Z. And I think really we have to start looking at what sort of solutions can we create, like the ADT, in the interim, while we also really begin to have real conversations around dismantling the structures that create these problems and limit our transfer outcomes. I will pause there, hand it back to you.
Marjorie, did you want to chime in?
I did. I just want to let the audience know that in my transferring experience, it was I felt like I was doing a puzzle because each school that I applied to had different requirements for the same major. And even that within itself was very hard, difficult, and overwhelming as a student. Because if I wanted to go to UC Berkeley, while their requirements is a lot lower, their acceptance rates is a lot lower. And if I wanted to go to UC Santa Cruz, I had to do different classes than I had to do to San Francisco State. And within that bureaucracy, I was very, very, very discouraged. And I must say, I got lucky enough to have a counselor that helped me and, went through the process with me. But the fact that I had to cross compare each school, each class, each credit, everything was the worst. Like, to me, that was, if I didn't have folks that really cared about me, I would not be here.
Marjorie,
go ahead.
There was a question from the audience about the help you did receive. Was that a particular program at the college you were attending? Was it just a few folks taking you under their wing?
So some folks volunteer from UC Berkeley to read my personal questions, to walk me through the application, and it was free. She did it out of the kindness of her heart. It wasn't a program. It wasn't anything part of the college. And I must say, to this day, actually just last semester, I understood the difference between an AA and ADT and the importance of an ADT at a CSU or UC. With an ADT, because I have an ADT, an associate degree to transfer in sociology, and I understood why that was important and how it makes a difference in the CSU, because some of my students, my peers, do have an ADT, but didn't understand and didn't took advantage of it. And while I did a lot of research and I was helped by this nonprofit, I understood how important like prior registration, they make sure you get out in 2 years and all that stuff. But the lack of information and the lack of support really makes a difference in the life of community college. My last semester, I'm only taking 2 classes because I did an ADT, while my peers are still taking 4 to 5 classes trying to graduate and make that May deadline. So I just wanted to highlight that even that is a process.
Honey, I want to make sure you look like you wanted to jump in.
Yeah, thanks. I just wanted to say thank you to Marjorie for sharing your experience. One of the efforts that the University of California has undertaken is the development of the UC transfer pathways, and that is a set of course expectations across all the UC campuses. It's a superset of courses. So this, regardless of which campus, if you're unsure of which UC campus you're interested in, if you follow the pathway, then your transfer students are prepared for admission to any of the UC campuses that offer the major. And the pathways have been developed so far to the 20 most sought after majors within the UC system. Unfortunately, that also means that because they're so sought after, there is also capacity issues. And I think Marty talked about that a bit. But the transfer pathways has been our effort to streamline transfer for students who are unsure of which campus they want to pursue. But certainly if students have a very specific goal in mind with a very specific campus and major, then the advice would be to actually follow that, the requirements for that campus and major. But the transfer pathways have been our efforts to streamline and and we appreciate that the associate degree for transfer, many of our pathways actually align very closely with the ADT at the individual community colleges. But there's no requirement to transfer to UC that is the completion of an associate's degree. So as long as you're following the pathway and meeting the minimum general education requirements, then students are well on their way to transfer. And I know that we're going to talk about general education probably in a little bit, but that's all I wanted to say. Thank you.
Yeah, I want to include our other reps from UC and CSU into the conversation, particularly because the ADT, the Associate Degree for Transfer, I believe only fewer than 30 community colleges offer the ADT in all degree programs. And this is especially a problem in the STEM majors. We had a few questions before the start of this discussion, in particular about nursing. And getting students transferred into BSN programs. So I'm wondering if maybe you all can talk a little bit about some of the difficulty that you all are seeing in building either STEM prerequisites for transfer or accepting STEM transfers from the community colleges.
So a couple things on the nursing pathway is with the lower division transfer requirements that students have, it is really hard to get all of the STEM preparation in those 60 units. So I think with the passing of AB 928 and the work that's already happening intersegmentally to look at the lower division transfer requirements, there's some opportunities there for us to get more STEM-oriented classes in the preparation for the students as they transfer. The other challenge with nursing specifically is that there are very specific requirements by the nursing board as far as the faculty to student ratios, and also there are only so many hospitals that will accept our students, and approximately 75% of the clinical has to be in a facility setting. So there is just a lot of capacity issues in general with nursing. We would love to offer more nursing programs, but at this point in time, there are state requirements and capacity requirements that are a little challenging with specifically with nursing.
And I would like to just mention something about nursing being one of the UC campuses that has a nursing sciences program. And I'm Dale, and thank you for having me on today. I appreciate it very much. Nursing science, we have a very, as April was saying, we have a very limited number of available openings for that program mandated by the state. This is not a campus choice. This is the state licensure board. So while it is one of our most applied to majors all the time, it is also one of our most selective because we have so few spots that we can offer to any students. So even though there's a great demand for nurses, in the state, and this is an incredibly important topic for us to pursue, we are bound, as LA is bound, by the state licensure requirements to have a very specific number of students in the final cohort who can be in the clinical practice at our hospitals in their senior year.
I just want to jump in here because I think that nursing is a perfect example of where kind of intersegmental coordination is needed. How do we ensure that the UC, CSU, and community colleges are working with state leaders to say, you have a workforce crisis and we have a capacity crisis. We clearly need more nurses, right? We know that COVID only exacerbated the nursing challenge because nursing students couldn't get their clinical hours in settings because of COVID. We know that many nursing faculty are resigning and leaving the workforce because it's been a crazy time. So this challenge is only getting worse, but how do we ensure that Dale is communicating with April and Marty and putting forward to say, here are our real challenges, and here are the regulations we need changed to open up licensing. Here's the investment we need. When I just to bring it back to transfer, I hear, and we hear a lot, and our students hear this a lot, that there are a lot of ways to transfer. And there are. I remember when we did a report prior to Chutes and Ladders, it was called the Transfer Maze several years ago. We found there were over 2,100 ways for a student to transfer just to the University of California. There are tag agreements, there are promise programs, there's the ADT, there's the promise pathways. There are so many pathways. It's absolutely correct that our institutions are working to get students and hopefully clear ways to transfer. But the lack of consolidation and systemization across is what's lacking. You cannot expect a first-generation student to come into our system and figure that all out. I mean, Marjorie gave the perfect example of saying, it's not until I almost completed that degree that I even knew I had it. And I didn't even understand the benefits of that degree. Why? Because she happened into a particular pathway. It could have been any pathway. But this is where, again, I think there's room to systematize transfer across the three segments. And I know that this is a big, sometimes territorial fight between CSU and UC that will say we've got different missions, we serve different students, but this is one California. This is one group of students that need higher education for economic mobility. And I think we've got to get behind and beyond those ivory tower walls and move together as one system. I can only imagine how frustrating it is for students to hear us on panels and roundtables year after year. I've been with the campaign for 13 years, and I'm still saying the same stuff in some ways. I think there's a lot of promise with AB 928 and bringing the segments together to talk about streamlining the general education pathway, to talk about scaling the ADT, to be defaulting students in some ways into the associate degree for transfer program. But it's only going to work if implementation happens where the rubber meets the road. And that's where I think as Californians, all of us have to be on the same page. And our students, and families, advocates, workforce have to be pushing for that.
If I can also jump in following those comments, which a strong +1, Audrey, to everything you were saying. I think this is what I was referencing when I said, we have to stop pointing fingers and we have to start dismantling structures, right? We can't point to here are the constraints why we need to stay static. I think to the nursing example, we have to start pushing on finding solutions, not just pointing to the constraints that limit what we've been able to do up to this point. That's our burden to bear. And as systems, we should be bearing that burden and doing that work. I would point to things like the recent legislation passed to support common course numbering for the community college system as one example of us trying to push on the systems, really thinking about how do our structures need to evolve in order to best serve students navigating transfer, dismantling the maze, and actually facilitating seamless transfer. I think this is another example of where we just don't go far enough, because it's one thing for the community colleges to all get on the same page with common course numbering, but it doesn't require that our four-year partners also participate in that effort. And also, how do we go farther than common course numbering and really get to a common transcript, so that it isn't about navigating different requirements at different campuses, but having that transparency from the moment you see your transcript and the courses on there and what it relates to and what it gets you at all of our institutions. And I think I would just, again, put a strong +1 to the push on. This isn't about our respective systems. This is about what we need as a state and what our Californians need in order to be able to thrive in this new knowledge economy, right? And so we have to move from that. It's our job to limit access and or create structures that force students to prove their worthiness of being here, to really creating that unconditional belonging across all of our systems, and really lean into it's our job to support them to master the competencies needed in order to move forward. So I think I can't emphasize enough that it is time for our structures to change and for us to stop sort of talking about transfer and more talking about how do we have a universal transcript that really demonstrates proficiency and validation of competency mastery as students are progressing.
I did want to jump in with a question from the audience, and I think this one would be directed to you, Hanmi. In terms of the pathways, is there any discussion about expanding from those 20?
There is, and that was always the intent. We began this process, but back in 2015, I believe, but it's really a faculty-driven process. We need to be able to convene faculty from across all the campuses, and even within a specific discipline, there are various specialties, right? So, trying to get agreement amongst all the faculties and the departments and across the campuses is quite a feat. So, we've been challenged, obviously, and we've said this already. Resources, time, COVID. But it's definitely something that we are, planning to do.
Jump in and bring up something that Audrey mentioned, and it points more to some of the solutions. AB 928 that passed the legislature last year. Audrey, I don't know if you want to expand a little bit more about some of the problems that bill is looking to solve. And then I'm hoping that the other reps here from CSU and UC can talk a little bit about what progress you all see coming out of 928 and what challenges do you think are still left for perhaps the legislature to tackle?
Yeah, Ashley, absolutely. So AB 928 is legislation that was passed, introduced by Assembly Member Mark Berman and sponsored by the Campaign for College Opportunity, that was really the result of that report, Chutes and Ladders, and a number of other studies that we had looked at to see that the ADT had been making some significant progress as a tool, right, for students to transfer, and how could we scale that essentially. So what AB 928 does is three critical things. First, it ensures that community college students, when they start as a first-time enrollee, that they are automatically placed onto an ADT pathway as long as it aligns with their major and as long as that's what they want to do. If they say, I don't want to be on an ADT pathway, then they can choose another pathway. But it's that idea that day one, they are on a path to baccalaureate degree that has a streamlined, number of courses and has all the benefits that would go along with the ADT. That would circumvent the challenge that Marjorie found herself, where she accidentally ended up on a pathway, was seeking out guidance along her pathway, didn't have it. This would start you day one. And then if you want to come off of it, you can, for whatever reasons you may have later on, if that's the case. The second thing it does is it asks / requires the CSU and UC to work together to have one singular general education pathway into their systems. Right now, the CSU and UC have different general education pathways for transfer students. That's that kind of discrimination I talked to you about before, when students coming from high school have one pathway, which is A to G. The difference is a GPA requirement to get into the two different segments, but the transfer students have two distinct pathways to get into those systems, and they are very different. And so bringing them together, aligning them so that there's one pathway, I think will make a big difference for students. So that's the second part of it. And the third part of it was the creation of an intersegmental committee with representatives from the community colleges, the CSU, the UC. There will be student representation, advocates, research representation on a committee that's charged with really looking at a couple of things. One, really important to the conversation we're having around STEM, is how do we ensure that there are more STEM ADTs? Because the ADTs cap the number of units a student can take at the community college level and the baccalaureate to 60 and 60, it makes it really difficult to fit a STEM major into that. STEM majors often require lots of lab courses and additional courses that pile on that unit count. And so we want to still be able to offer students the protection of unit caps, the benefit of the guarantee. So we probably have to go above these unit thresholds, but we want to keep it still in this form. So part of that committee's charge is to really say, okay, what should the unit counts be? And how do we really expand ADT in that space to create more in the STEM fields? They'll also be really assessing, how do we scale? What are the current challenges with ADT? And how do we better, align ourselves? So I think that conversation is overdue. There was an intersegmental committee that started when the first ADTs were created that allowed it to grow to the size it is today, but that has yet to be reconvened. And I think this is kind of part B, the next phase, the next iteration of really promising our students a fix on transfer.
I wanted to speak to the implementation of the development of the singular general education requirements, I think part 2 of what Audrey was discussing of 928. And that work is being done under the Intersegmental Committee of Academic Senate. And they've established a special committee of faculty representatives and staff advisors from UC, CSU, and the community colleges to make a recommendation about the singular general education pathway. And that special committee is expected to submit their final recommendation to ICAS, the Intersegmental Committee of Academic Senates, by May 6th of this year. And so we're on a very aggressive timeline, but we're very hopeful that we will be soon at the place where we have that singular pathway, which was spelled out in 928.
So just a couple points to follow up on what Audrey was talking about, 928. I think it's important to remember that one of the pieces of that bill was a communication component. I think Marjorie talked about it earlier, that students don't actually know what an associate degree for transfer is. They are still, even though the legislation was passed in 2010, they are still very confused about the differences between an associate's degree, an associate degree for transfer, and also just transferring without an associate's degree if they so choose. So I think that's an important piece of 928 that sometimes gets lost, but I think it will be a critical piece as we move forward with implementing that legislation. Also, I just wanted to clarify that the CSU does accept the IGETC lower division general education pathway, which is usually referred to as the UC pathway. There are a couple differences. So for example, we do not require the foreign language, but if a student is unsure when they start community college right now about what pathway they want to choose, we would definitely recommend that those students start following that IGETC pathway, because that does leave their options open for both the CSU and the UC.
For that committee, do you guys have student input? Because what happens in my line of work as an advocate is that the intention doesn't meet the impact, right? So that while the intentions are to be singular and do that and create a better way of transferring, the impact is not the same when it comes to students. And that's where I believe student voices should be heard. I understand that it might be complicated, and sometimes administrators and teachers have that paternalistic attitude that we don't know, but there's a lot of transfer students in CSU and UC that voices can be part of that board and part of that committee and help shape a meaningful impact to that. And I had another question for April. Where's April? Right there. Hi, April. So my question was, yes, I did not know, is there a reason, and maybe this is part of the CSU and UC, why there isn't a transfer class for transfer students that helps them meet them where they at to go to the next phase, which CSU and UC support that class and recognize that class as credit class. It's just kind of like the work experience class community college give, or CSU internship classes that they provide. So I was wondering, has there ever been a discussion about that or any opportunity to do that?
So I think Marty and our team have started to have some conversations about specifically how we can improve those pieces. We do a lot of outreach with the community colleges today. So many of our campuses work with the transfer centers, but I think, Marjorie, your point was someone really has to go out and meet that student where they are and bring them to the transfer center or work with them. So I think that's one of the pieces that we have a lot of work to do in that area. I can personally speak as a first generation community I started at a community college. I was very disillusioned about my path, and actually sometimes am kind of pretty proud of myself that I made it to where I am today. So I think that we do have a lot of work to do in that area, but our campuses continue to support the community colleges and working with the transfer centers. We're also trying to educate high school counselors on the transfer pathways. That's something that we've done over the last couple of years in our CSU counselor conferences. And then also, I think there's some exciting opportunities that are coming to us. So one is that in the governor's budget act last year in 23-24, both the UC and the CSU will launch a dual admissions program. So that's going to help us identify students that are interested in the transfer pathway a lot earlier. And then the CSU is also working on what we're calling a transfer planner. So it would be a statewide tool that would leverage Assist. You talked about Assist earlier. So assist.org is a site where students can see kind of the transfer pathways and options. So we're going to leverage that data to really provide a tool for students on the transfer pathway to be able to understand what their options are and be able to track what campuses they're interested in and what that path looks like. I would also encourage students, and especially high school students, californiacolleges.edu is also a very good tool for career assessments, college research, and through the Cradle to Career passage, that tool is now becoming statewide. So there's already 700,000 students and 107,000 districts that have access to that school tool. And there's going to be actually about 37 more school districts coming on this year. So there's a lot of options that are coming forward, and a lot of the work that we're doing at the state level and the segments to really better support students.
I just wanted to touch back on Marjorie's question about AB 928 and whether or not there will be student representation. Absolutely, there will be. The appointment process has already begun, and so students are putting their names forward to be considered for an appointment to that committee. And I just want to share, Marjorie, you know, it was the Cal State Student Association, the UC Student Association that came on board as strong supporters as well as advocates for AB 928. They were leading a lot of the advocacy efforts to get this implemented. As former transfer students, they understood how important this was and didn't want to see other students go through that. So students have been a vital part of this effort.
Hami and Dale, I want to give you guys a chance to talk a little bit about just how involved are the UCs with the community colleges in preparing transfer students before they actually make that jump.
I can speak to our campus in that we have a very active outreach program. We're able to leverage our virtual outreach opportunities. For the first time this year, we had applications from all 116 California community colleges. Very excited about that. It's part of our mission and the Board of Regents policy to recruit and enroll students who reflect the diversity of the state of California geographically is part of that diversity. So it's very important for us to reach out through all of the entire state and communicate to community colleges everywhere. The last 2 years have been challenging, of course, with COVID and not being able to do the kind of traditional outreach activities we did. But what we found was an ability to leverage, like I mentioned, virtual events that actually allowed us to communicate to colleges where we would never have been able to get to in person. So the expectation over the last 2 years that we could communicate actually kind of helped us to reach to Humboldt County, to reach to Merced, to reach places that we hadn't been able to get to physically. So I think that the technology that we have now and the expertise and experience that we have has really helped us to connect better with students individually and to counselors. And I think it's important for us to be able to, as a campus, as our campus, to communicate effectively with community college counselors, because they are going to get to see students far more often than we're going to get to see students. I mean, we are one of the 6 UC campuses that can use to have a TAG program, Transfer Admission Guarantee Program. And that's a very powerful tool for us and for the students around us and for the students across the state. So that's a tool that we have, or an approach that we allow students to pursue that I think really helps us communicate well and to provide a structured pathway for students to come into our campus fully prepared for the upper division. I know that we focus a lot about the admit process and the admit moment and when students move to the UCs. We have a transfer center for our transfer students, many services. Maybe Norma could put that up in the chat. We also are really focused on to have students coming into us fully prepared for the upper division. And we've been pretty flexible about adapting our curriculum, especially in majors like engineering, where we had some courses that we were requiring previously, and we were finding that colleges were not able to teach those courses. So our faculty made some changes to their curriculum and moved some courses to the upper division to kind of facilitate some of that transfer work. So when I think that we're trying a whole bunch of ways. When people talk about barriers and challenges, we are really committed to our transfer population, and we're working to find solutions that are not just finger pointing, like we said.
Dale, could you reference the transfer admission guarantee at your campus? Mm-hmm. For our audience who might not be aware of that specific pathway, could you elaborate on what exactly that is? And I'm curious, how many students, do you have a sense of how many transfer students are taking advantage of that particular pathway?
Sure, we have more TAG applications than any other UC campus. So we had about, I think, 4,200 transfer admission guarantee applications for this cycle. Don't post that date anywhere. Sorry, Hanmi, that date is embargoed until tomorrow. I think we'll get some releases about application data. The process is that a student applies, meets the major preparation requirements, is going to complete them before the summer, and has a GPA for our purposes of a 3.4 in UC transferable courses or higher. Now, 3.4 is pretty high, but you have to remember that we have 23,000 plus applications. So we're a pretty selective campus. So this guarantee and that high GPA lets us guarantee admission to those students. And it's a literal guarantee. We had to remove some of our majors from that guarantee in the past because there were simply too many students meeting the transfer admission guarantee requirements. So we don't offer a guarantee to business administration or computer science or to nursing. But the vast majority of our majors allow a transfer admission guarantee.
Okay, from a system-wide perspective, about a third of our transfer applicants do apply with a transfer admission guarantee, but the majority of students are admitted, without a transfer admission guarantee. But it's the unique thing about the TAG program is that it is a one-to-one program, and so it's the student is making an agreement with a specific campus to be admitted to a specific major. And as Dale said, it's a true guarantee. And so if a program has a capacity of 100 students, but 200 students fulfill that guarantee agreement, then the campus is committed to bringing in all 200 students. But the other thing is it's not binding to the student. And so, they can have their tag and then apply to other UC campuses or other, CSUs and have the knowledge, it's like that psychological impact of knowing that they have that guarantee in hand, but then waiting to see where else they might be admitted. And, we have many, many students who are being admitted and enrolling at our UC campuses that actually don't offer the transfer admission guarantee. But it is a very powerful program, having that knowledge in advance that you will have the guarantee to the campus and to your major.
I think Dale brought up a really great point about having so many qualified students. And I think, we'd be remiss not to talk about the elephant in the room when it comes to transfer, which is also capacity. California has far more qualified students than we have space for in our CSU and UC systems. And our UC and CSU systems are in a bind in that they have to figure out how to do what is officially called enrollment management, but is essentially rationing higher education. We have qualified freshmen, talented qualified freshmen, and we have qualified and talented transfer students that we simply don't have the space for. And sometimes the reason why we don't see students transferring from the community colleges into the CSU, where they may earn their ADT, they may earn their AA, but not actually transfer, is because they wanted to attend a CSU, but kept getting messages that the campuses were impacted and they didn't get into their campus of choice. So maybe now a student that is place bound that needed to go to a school within LA or Orange County only got into Bakersfield, or maybe only got into Chico, and they can't make that trip. They can't make that work for them. And so, I think the UC does a really good job. I mean, the CSU does a really good job with offering local students some additional points when they're looking to transfer, but that doesn't exist, at the UC. And that's something I think we need to be talking about. But again, I think that the governor's budget that he proposed in January, that does provide some ongoing significant investments and creates a compact with the systems to grow enrollment, both at the freshman and transfer level, is absolutely imperative. Because if we have a perfect transfer system, which we should be working on, where are these students going to go? We have to make sure we owe it to our students that they have a spot. And that doesn't have to mean growing and building new campuses. It does mean, though, that we have to be thinking differently about how we expand capacity across both the CSU and UC, and what opportunities exist when all three segments work together to expand capacity, share space, share faculty, share all of those things.
Just to follow up a couple points about capacity. So one of the things is the CSU, part of our mission, we are committed to transfer students. So over 48% of our fall 21 class, undergraduate class, was transfer students. And also we admitted 85% of the transfer students that applied to the CSU. So we do have capacity. And then we also have, as we've talked about a little bit, is impacted campuses, but 7 of the 23 campuses are not impacted at the transfer level. Now they may have specific programs like, for example, nursing that are impacted, and they do give local area priority to their students. We will also have most likely 3 more campuses that will be coming out of impaction at the transfer level for fall 23. So we do have campus capacity, and we also provide students the option, what we call redirection. So for students that aren't admitted to any of the CSU campuses that they applied to, for first-time freshmen, associate degree for transfer students, and upper division transfers, we let them look at opportunities to redirect their application for free to another CSU campus. So we are trying to make sure that students have capacity and can go to a CSU if they're interested.
We're approaching just a few minutes left, but I see a few hands up. Marty, did you want to jump in?
Great, thank you. I do. I think a couple of points that I want to flag here, and I appreciate the naming the elephant in the room around capacity constraints, because one of the things that this really recenters my thinking on is that we don't have the luxury of only, and within the community college system, of only playing, or only trying to navigate the transfer maze that is related to UC and CSU. Our students transfer everywhere. They transfer in-state, they transfer out of state, they transfer to private institutions, they transfer to for-profit institutions. And so part of what we are continually trying to navigate is how do we best serve students, recognizing that there isn't a guarantee when they try to transfer to UC and CSU, even with the guarantees. When we look at the data, even just for 2020, we see almost half of the students who applied for CSU did not actually end up enrolling, even though the majority of them were admitted, right? And so this issue of place bound, and we're talking over almost 60,000 students who applied, were admitted, and did not enroll, right? And those are student choices. So the majority of them were admitted, right? But there are constraints there that we have to wrestle with that are either place-bound, full-time, they didn't get into the program they wanted to, et cetera, et cetera. And so this also brings back to mind the issue that has to be front and center is equity. Who is being impacted by the constraints that we have put in place and the capacity issues that our systems have, but also then how do we make sure that when we are elevating student voice, and we're talking about elevating student voice, to Marjorie's point, making sure students are in the room and that they are front and center and that they have the loudest voice in those rooms. How are we also centering the student data, disaggregated student data, so that we understand when we are making decisions about potential solutions, we're also evaluating whether or not they were effective and who they were effective for. I will hand it back to you because I'm hoping Marjorie gets the last word.
I am hoping too. Marjorie, I think you will have the last word.
Hi, I'm sorry. So I should have brought this up earlier, but one of the most significant problem we have as transfer students, like I said, besides the information, is how the counselors address that. For example, like if I go to an EOPS counselor, they'll give me one transfer pathway versus a different counselor at a different retention center versus the transfer center. So I think that counselors play an important role at community college on helping ease the CSU and UC maze that we have. And we have to kind of think about how we can address that better. I know there's millions of pathways and there's not one problem solve all, but maybe if we can think about how we can address that, because I have done surveys many times, and I'll tell you that counselor issues is a big issue among different type of students that are trying to transfer. And that's just, getting the different information from different places and becoming overwhelmed. But I want to thank all of you guys for letting me join and be part of this conversation. I think it's important. And I think that we should continue the conversation because a lot of students are being discouraged, and 6 years at a community college is not acceptable, and we have wonderful CSU and UCs that they can attend every day.
Well, thank you, Marjorie, on that note. And I want to thank you, and I want to thank all of our panelists, as well as those who have been behind the scenes answering the very many questions from our audience. I want to thank our audience for asking all of those questions and the engagement. Clearly, this is a hot button issue, and there's probably many more roundtables that could be done just on this topic. Thanks to our co-moderators, Michael and Ashley. And I want to wish everyone a great week. Thank you for listening, and please be on the lookout for our story and our recording of today's roundtable. Take care.